school leader, we're going to be in a brand new unit starting this week. So let's take a look, see what we've got coming up. The unit is entitled God Is. We're in week 1 looking at God is our provider out of Genesis chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. And the point of the lesson is trust in God to meet our needs. Well, this week's text deals with God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. And I'm going to go back and do a little bit of background. So I'm going to use Abraham and Sarah, where maybe technically it's Abram and Sarai, because you know their names change. So I'm just going to use Abraham and Sarah, and you'll know who I'm talking about. So as we look at the background, we go back to chapter 15. And we see that God promises Abraham that his offspring will be so numerous, they'll be as numerous as the stars, and he has promised an heir from his own body. In chapter 16, we see that Sarah gives her handmaiden Hagar to Abraham, kind of as a shortcut to the promise. And then the Hagar conceives and bears Ishmael. Chapter 17 comes along. We see Abraham is 99 years old. Sarah is told she will bear a son, and she's about 90 years old. And Abraham says, well, if only Ishmael was acceptable to you, and God says, no, that is not the case. You will have an heir from your own body through Sarah. And so we get circumcision is introduced. Ishmael is 13 years old here, so it's been around 14 years since Hagar was given to Abraham. So they've been waiting on the fulfillment of this promise for a long time. Now, you probably know this story, and you probably know it pretty well, but don't assume that your students do. I'm finding that more and more adults are biblically illiterate, so let's just not assume anything. In our text this week, in chapter 22, in verse 1, it says, sometime later, God tested Abraham. Now, we need to make sure we know that that's tested, not tempted. All right, we know that God does not tempt. He will test, though. And God called him by his name, Abraham. And how did Abraham answer? Pretty similar to Isaiah's answer. Here I am. And so what did God tell him to do? Take your son, your only son, the son whom you love. And just to make sure he knew, he said Isaac. So take Isaac and sacrifice him as a burnt offering to me. Well, while that could be pretty impossible to grasp under regular circumstances, let's remember the background. Remember, they've been waiting at least 14 years, probably more, for this child. And that the promise was going to be that through this child, Abraham was going to have descendants too numerous to count. So killing the boy as a sacrifice really made no sense. But Abraham obeyed. He loaded up, took servants, took a donkey, and they loaded up on a 3-day journey to the spot. And Abraham tells his servants in verse 5, stay here and we will come back to you. We will come back to you. So that was either he was keeping it really cool, or he had this extreme faith that God was going to provide an alternative solution. We get down to verse 8. They're gathering up the wood, Isaac and Abraham. And Isaac says, the fire and the wood are here, but where's the lamb? And Abraham said, God will provide the lamb. Now, he didn't say God provided the lamb, the past tense, meaning that God provided you to me and you are the lamb. He didn't say that. He said God will provide the lamb. Abraham, I think, had this faith that God was going to intervene. And the boy then is tied to the altar, and there's no mention of a struggle here of any kind. And just as that knife is being raised, the angel of the Lord called out from heaven and said, Abraham. And again, Abraham said, here I am. Angel said, don't lay a hand on the boy. Okay, now what happens next? Abraham finds a ram caught in the thickets, probably caught in the thorns, and sacrificed it instead. God did provide. How does this passage foreshadow the gospel? Well, I did a little internet search, and I found a whole bunch of reasons. I'm going to list those out kind of quickly here for you. The father leads his son to be sacrificed. A donkey is involved on the road to sacrifice. They leave their homeland to go to that place of sacrifice. We've got Abraham and Isaac traveling to the mountain, and Jesus leaving heaven to come to earth. Both sons were born with divine intervention. Okay, we got Jesus, of course, and then we have Isaac being born to people in their 90s. Pretty unusual there. The son asked questions of the father. The son carried wood or the cross to the place of sacrifice. The father knew what he was called to do. The son was submissive to the father. The father was willing to sacrifice the son. The father loved the son. The Lord provided the sacrifice, whether that's the ram or Jesus. The sacrifice was a substitute. The ram substituted for Isaac. Jesus was a substitute for us. The sacrifice was a demonstration of the love of God. The ram was caught in the thicket or in the thorns, and Jesus had what on his head? Crown of thorns. And the son ultimately survived the sacrifice. Now, if you'd like for me to email you that list of similarities, my email address is right down here. Just email me and ask me, and I'll send that to you. Now, you might see some sources that equate Mount Moriah, where Abraham was, with Mount Calvary, where Jesus died. But Solomon built the temple on the spot where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, there on Mount Moriah. That's where Solomon built the temple. Mount Calvary was outside the city limits, so really don't think those are the same. Now that would be neat. It would preach, but I don't think it's true. All right, Abraham named the place. What did he name it? He named it "The Lord Will Provide." Or you may hear Jehovah Jireh, and that's what that means. Jehovah, the Lord, Jireh, will provide. So yes, the Lord continues to provide to us even today. What does James 1:17 say? It says, every good and perfect gift comes from above. Right, here's what we don't want to take away from this passage, from this lesson this week. We don't want people to go away thinking whenever we find ourselves in tough situations, God's going to swoop in and miraculously save us. Sometimes that may be the case, but oftentimes it's not. It didn't happen with Jesus. Jesus said, as he prayed in the garden, the day before his night before his crucifixion, Lord, take this cup from me, and it didn't happen. It wasn't true with the disciples. They were beaten. They were martyred. Okay, so we shouldn't expect any better treatment than that. Here's what we do need to take away from this lesson. We do need to remember what 1 Corinthians 10:13 says. It says that when tempted, he, being God, will provide a way of escape. God provides. He provides for us still. He provides a way of escape. What does Psalm 111 verse 9 say? It says that he provided redemption for his people. Ultimately, that's Jesus. He provided the ultimate sacrifice for sin. So God is our provider. So let's make sure and give him thanks for what he has provided us with. You may have the question come up in class. I know I've heard it before about the angel of the Lord. Is that the pre-incarnate Christ? I've done a little bit of research on that, and it seems to point in that direction, that might be Christ, the Son, before he became Jesus, before he became in flesh and was named Jesus, the pre-incarnate Christ. You might do a little research on that and be prepared to maybe discuss that if that comes up. All right, that's all for this week. I'm looking forward to this new unit. I think it's going to be a good one. All right, don't forget to pray for your class.